For generations, we've depended on science to enhance our lives here on planet Earth, but now the science that we've depended on is fundamentally transforming our world. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is the first of a series that we're calling Genetic Armageddon, as science rewrites the genetic code, not just of humanity, but of the creatures that the Lord has entrusted to us as stewards of His creation. In the coming weeks, you'll hear from experts such as holistic veterinarian Dr. Gene Hovey, talking about how the food that we are feeding our pets is actually rewriting their DNA. Today, we'll focus on a new book. This is a book that will shock you, it will alarm you, it may make you angry. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Our guests today, the co-authors of the book, Donna Howell and Joe Artis. Welcome.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having us.
This, well, I'll say again, this is a book that will leave the reader angry, I think. Joe, what was it that came to your attention that led you and Donna to write Dead Pets Don't Lie?
We started writing the book after we came into some information that was quite alarming about the underhanded practices of what's going on in the commercial pet food industry. And some of the information, let me just premise right away that as we're sharing some of the things we're going to talk about in this program, I already know in advance that a lot of the viewers of this program will probably hear some of what we have to say, and their initial reaction will be very similar to the reaction that I once had when I was first learning of it, and that is, what? This can't be real, right? They can't make this stuff up, right? Would it shock you, Derek, if I told you that all across the USA, right now, in commercial chain stores, popular, huge chain stores.
The big box stores,
right,
yep.
That tons and tons of the most popular commercial pet foods on the market actually contain euthanized dogs and cats.
When we have a pet, because we've had to put down several dogs in my lifetime, and it was a difficult experience. But you're telling me that after our dogs passed through the veterinarian's office, there was a good chance that they wound up back in the food chain for other dogs and cats?
There's a very strong possibility that they're picked up by what is known as a rendering plant, a rendering company. And what these rendering companies do is they don't want to waste that opportunity to increase their bottom line. This is in fact a source of protein, okay, in the eyes of the commercial manufacturers that are making the food. So why not? Why let those opportunities to gather that meat up go to waste, right? Well, now they're relying, of course, on the fact that they've got these big television campaigns and so forth, and people have this assumption that some or many factions within the government, that there are these benevolent arms of the government that is regulating this, which again is why this whole idea sounds preposterous when you hear it up front. But the idea that the FDA or some other branch of the government is insulating them from these issues, these poisons, these disastrous meats. And of course, many people don't know this, but the chemical pentobarbital that's used when you euthanize a cat or a dog remains in the meat through the rendering process.
It survives the rendering process.
It survives the rendering process, that's right. And I've got something, we during our investigation, the investigation that Donna Howell and I did over the last couple of years as we were compiling the information for the book Dead Pets Don't Lie, we were able to retrieve documents from the FDA directly. So the following, I'm going to read you something. This is an admission directly from the horse's mouth. The FDA not only knows this is going on, but they're not regulating it to the degree that it avoids what we're talking about right now, where these animals are not scrutinized and pulled. They're absolutely rendered and put back into the pet foods. This is an excerpt directly from the FDA. Because in addition to producing anesthesia, pentobarbital is routinely used to euthanize animals, the most likely way it could get into dog food would be in rendered animal products. Rendered products come from a process that converts animal tissues to feed ingredients. Pentobarbital seems to be able to survive the rendering process. If animals are euthanized with pentobarbital and subsequently rendered, pentobarbital could be present in the rendered feed ingredients.
So the chemical that's used to euthanize, to kill these sick animals, these aged animals, survives the process and winds up back in the What would the ingredient be called in the pet food? Crude protein?
We call it poisonous meats.
Yeah, but
yes, it absolutely survives the rendering process, and that's what I'm getting at. The FDA already knows this is happening. So when pets are euthanized at some of these shelters and vet clinics, they are then picked up by people that gather meat throughout the city. Some of this can be roadkill. Some of this, take for example, people that are raising cattle. Okay, let's say you have 1,000 cows on a cattle farm. Mm-hmm. Well, again, we don't want to waste these opportunities, right, to gather meat. Well, after all, this can be rendered and put into the protein powder that ultimately makes it into a ton of these commercial pet foods. So cattle that are diseased. The first time I ever heard the phrase food animal, okay, food animal, that's the term we're using for a lot of the animals that make it into the rendering process and then passed along into these commercial pet foods. What is a food animal? A food animal, according to the FDA, is any meat source within an animal that is not fit for human consumption. So this includes animals with cancer, visible tumors. I mean, some of this stuff is so gross, I really don't want to talk about it on television and people change the channel, but you know, cattle that are found dead or already dying. Chickens with protrusions that have huge tumors coming off the side of their body where they are so large because of the illness that they're inflicted by, they can't even walk. I've seen video of these chickens where they're just hobbling across the ground. Well, when they're dead or after they're dead, and sometimes these animals can be found dead in a pasture 2-3 weeks later, riddled with maggots, crawling with all kinds of life form and flies and things like this. Those are picked up by people that take all of this, the euthanized pets, the unfit for human consumption animals that are coming from farms and various places. All of them are bottlenecked to a rendering company where up a conveyor belt they go into basically a mulcher, and they're ground up into what is called a protein powder, and that powder is then sold to tons. I mean, I think it would really shock people if they knew the number of popular these people have TV ads constantly promoting the health and the wellness of their commercial pet foods, and these animals are ending up all in the same vat and then sold to unsuspecting consumers who again believe that there is some benevolent insulator out there within the government that is regulating this food and keeping the world of pet food safe for them, and they don't have to do any of the thinking.
Go ahead.
It sounds like what he is saying is so sensational that it can't hardly be believed.
Yes.
The Discovery Channel did what was called the animal rendering business or something like that, where Mike Rowe, the host of Dirty Jobs, went with the Discovery Channel and actually filmed the entire rendering process at a plant. The cow that they had picked up at the beginning of the episode had been dead for at least 4 days, they said. It was, like Joe said, covered in maggots. By the time this clearly diseased meat had been taken, they discussed how it was going from point A to point Z, which is the protein powder that's carried from the plant to wherever it goes. And they admitted in that episode that it is being sold to the highest bidder. They don't care where it goes and what it's used for. But the one thing that Joe didn't mention that I think is also crucial to the rendering process is the denaturing that happens. Close to the end, it's not just the heat process that goes in. And by the way, the rendering process, the pentobarbital does survive it, as well as a lot of other nasty chemicals that are in this big vat of the raw, they call it. But one of the things that they have to do is sanitize it or denature it from some of the other things that could cause immediate harm or death or whatever. And in that, they're adding other chemicals to the process, which would never be allowed in human foods, but what it does for the pet is it makes it so that the person feeding Fido every single day has no idea these denaturing chemicals, a glorified version of bleach, if you will, just to make it simple for the viewers, is actually doing a lot more damage over time, as well as second generation euthanasia, pentobarbital in food over time.
And understand the denaturing process changes the shape of the protein in the protein powder, which means that the bodies of our pets don't treat these proteins coming through the same way they would if they were, say, eating a fresh ground beef, for example, or a fresh fish. The protein, after it's been heated and treated, the protein shape changes, which is critical because how the body responds to protein depends on the shape.
But also, Derek, because pounds equals dollars. There is no, and again, I realize this is hard for people to accept, but during the rendering process, when these people are creating protein sources and stuff, and by the way, that's when you pick up a bag of commercial pet food and you flip it over and it says meat byproduct. That's what that means. They don't want to identify a specific meat source like chicken or beef. Byproducts means, hey, it's just a big swarm of whatever we were able to get that month from the city, who's picking up dead animals from the streets. This could include roadkill. But also, when a supermarket gets a whole delivery of, let's say, fresh fish or chicken, when those meats at the grocery store go over the expiration, those are often then also picked up by, it's convenient for the grocery stores.
Sure.
A man will show up, he'll pick up all of those expired meats, and those are also delivered to the pet food rendering companies. And when they're all coming up the conveyor belt before they get mulched, they're not opened. They're not removing the plastic. They're not taking the meat off
styrofoam tray.
Styrofoam
that
tray.
all gets ground up into
the steak. The sticker. The ink on the sticker.
Any supermarket rejects.
Any supermarket rejects.
And everything tied to it.
And again, the euthanized pets, the roadkill, a lot of these cats and dogs are still wearing their flea collars. They don't remove the ID tags. And Derek, you know that in a recent interview that we did here at Skywatch TV, Dr. Hovey said that euthanized pets, chemicals like pentobarbital, might be the least of people's worries.
This is disturbing, but this is information that we need. As Christians, you may be wondering why we're focusing on pets. Check Genesis chapter 2. The Lord made us stewards of his creation. To take dominion of the earth means to protect it, guard it, and shepherd it with care. That's why we're focusing on this, and we'll talk more with the authors of Dead Pets Don't Lie as Skywatch TV continues right after this.
Throughout time, one question has puzzled humanity.
Grandma, will my pony go to heaven?
Will your pony go to heaven?
What's really behind the relationship between humans and animals? Does the bond bear significance in our walk with God? How do you find peace when you've lost a beloved pet? Do our pets go to heaven? Learn the amazing facts behind what the Bible has to say on this subject as you journey with animal behaviorist Joe Artis, prolific writers Tom Horn and Terry James, as well as other thoughtful contributors as they recount the amazing tales of pets that saved lives, animal companions that helped with healing, and what God Himself has to say about the redemption of His beloved creation.
Our series Genetic Armageddon continues on Skywatch TV as we continue looking at the ways science is fundamentally transforming the world around us as we continue our conversation with the co-authors of the new book, Dead Pets Don't Lie, Joe Artis and Donna Howell. Joe, you left us just before the break. Dr. Gene Hovey, holistic veterinarian that you interviewed for the book, made the comment that what we've been talking about in the first half of the program, that the pentobarbital to euthanize pets, making it into the food chain, may be the least of pet owners' worries?
That's right. I want to share something that we retrieved from the FDA. We were able to retrieve documentation that, in their own words, they not only acknowledge this is happening, but they're not regulating it out of existence. Pentobarbital, the idea that a pet would, because I can see certain pet owners that might feel like, well, you know, if a dog eats a euthanized dog, I mean, wouldn't that happen in the wild? Wouldn't a wolf find another dead wolf or something like that and maybe eat them?
But not one that's been poisoned to death.
But not one that's been poisoned to death, that's been through the denaturing process where chemicals have bleached the meat, now rendered into with styrofoam trays and dead cattle and maggots and all of these other things. But let me share a couple of the, and this is very popular. This is not a conspiratorial thing. This is not just only if you go to a farm feed store and you find some obscure brand. I'm talking about big commercial chains. A ton of those pet foods are being preserved for unnaturally long shelf lives to help the person manufacturing it improve their bottom line. It gives them a larger window in which to sell the food. They're being preserved with chemicals that are just absolutely outrageous. They're devastating. The ramifications are devastating to the pet. And again, this is directly from some of the resources we were able to pull from the FDA. One chemical, I'm going to give you a couple examples of dozens. Propylene glycol, used in pet foods to stabilize moisture, inhibit bacterial growth, maintain texture, and used as a sweetener. Okay, so that the pet is like, wow, this tastes really good. I'm wildly excited about it. It is largely considered one of the most dangerous preservatives in pet foods. It also happens to be a well-known ingredient in antifreeze.
I was going to say, that sounded familiar, and that's why we're told when you've got antifreeze around to keep it away from pets, because the sweet taste will attract them and
that's right.
Kill them.
That's right. But see, when a person buys pet food and they take it home to see if Fluffy enjoys it, and Fluffy's just so ravenous about it, you know, animals are going to often eat based on smell and taste. Mm-hmm. So they're going to eat this stuff ravenously, and it's going to leave the person who bought the pet food with this impression, wow, this must be a good one. It is known to cause illness in canines, can inhibit growth of an animal's good bacteria. This is why a lot of people will take probiotics. Mm-hmm. Can cause blockage or cancerous lesions in the intestines because of its use in moisture control. Considered to cause the most overlooked issues in canine health, including itching, dryness of skin. I saw that a lot. And do see it a lot when I'm in the field working with canines, various clients. You see that a lot. Dryness of skin, and you often find that they're feeding these cheap commercial dog foods. Dehydration, hair loss, anemia, and irregularities in the mouth, teeth, and gums, listed as grass by the FDA.
Generally regarded as safe.
Generally regarded as safe.
Generally recognized as safe.
Let me give you another really quick example. This is going to blow your mind. TBHQ is another very popularly used preservative in pet food, used as a preservative as well as an ingredient in explosives, varnishes, resins, and lacquers. And I don't mean to sound condescending, I really don't. It's just that I almost, as I'm reading this material directly from the FDA, I mean, it leaves me with this impression that, is there no limit? Is there seriously no limit to what they will allow to be used in commercial pet foods? Contains petroleum-derived butane, links to precancerous stomach tumors in labs, can cause damage to your DNA, considered safe by the FDA for use in pet food.
Yeah, and as we talked, we found out from Dr. Hovey that a recent study showing that dogs have expressed more genes that allow them to process carbohydrates, enzymes that allow them to process carbohydrates. It's not necessarily dogs were created to eat corn-based kibble. It's because we've been feeding them corn-based kibble. We're changing their DNA to adapt to the food that we've been given.
That's right.
Yeah. Donna, speaking of how long this can go on and how much is allowed, there's a chapter in the book called the Pass the Buck Regulation Game. What do you mean by that?
There's kind of a game of finger pointing that goes on in the pet food industry. The only regulatory authority, period, is the FDA. But let's say that, you know, John Smith decides that he wants to start a pet food company. He goes to the FDA and says, what is required? Straight off the FDA website, it's cited several times in the book, there is no pre-market approval necessary. Absolutely no pre-market approval required by the FDA.
Really?
You can see it on their website. So John Smith says, well, if I don't need anything from the FDA, what are they at least suggesting I follow? The FDA points a finger at both the PFI, the Pet Food Institute, and AAFCO. So John Smith goes to these two different websites and says, okay, what is required of me? What do I got to do? The first thing that both AAFCO and PFI say at the top of their website is we don't have any regulatory authority. We exist to create really, really high standard suggestion laws. We suggest that you follow these. We really hope you do, because if you follow all of these little laws and policies and regulations as far as, you know, the high standards of pet food, this is going to be your healthiest food. Mm-hmm. So John Smith says, okay, thank you, AAFCO, for your suggestion, but if it's not regulated, I'm not going to follow that because I'm John Smith and I'm going to cut corners. Mm-hmm. So forget you, AAFCO. What does PFI say? Same exact thing as AAFCO. But all the while, FDA is saying, you really need to be following these guys over here. So it's just a finger-pointing game. It continues to go round and around and around. Finally, John Smith says, look, I don't have to follow what AFCO says. I don't have to follow what PFI says. The FDA says that there is not a pre-market approval standard. So there really is no regulation prior to the market, and it isn't until a pet gets hurt that somebody would have to step in and regulate.
As in the case some years ago where ingredients coming from China contained melamine and dogs began to die.
Yep.
With just a couple of minutes left, what do people do? How do we educate ourselves so that we aren't feeding our pets poison?
Yes, thank you for asking that, Derek. I want to make it very clear to the people watching this program that Dead Pets Don't Lie was a very serious multi-year investigation, but it's not just a book with tons and tons and tons, and it's not only limited to all of this terrible news. We knew when we took on this writing project that people would want to know, what can we do? We're not fatalist about this. There are things that a person can absolutely do to dramatically reduce the number of poisons and things, if not completely eliminate the poisons and the toxins that their pet is being exposed to. And if I may, let me just share just a few, and we're just going to skim the surface with this very broad stroke, but for somebody watching the program that wants to know where they can start immediately today. Number one, when you look at a pet food bag, flip it over, look at the label, and make sure that it doesn't say anywhere byproducts.
Or meat and bone meal.
Meat and bone meal. Avoid those like the plague. If you see poultry byproduct, meat byproduct of any kind, avoid that bag completely. Try to steer away from pet foods that use primary ingredients like corn and various grain types. The other thing you can do is go on the web. Type in the name of the brand you're considering and look for recalls associated with that brand. You'll often find that a lot of popular commercial foods have been pulled off the markets for various salmonella outbreaks and things like this where they've been pulled back in. There are good brands out there that do not have recalls associated with it. When you're doing research, talk to a smaller boutique-style pet store. Go into a place where you're going to get more of a mom and pop shop. I have found that you get more educated type information as opposed to the big commercial type pet stores. And finally, look for bags that on the label read the ingredient sources that have been used, read like prairie raised or free range chicken and beef. And typically
wild caught fish.
That typically means that they're free range, that they're eating things that are native to what they should be eating. Cattle eating grass, chicken eating seed, and not being fed things like cattle, being fed things like genetically modified corn and then being turned around and rendered into pet food.
It's startling, it's stunning, and frankly, it's infuriating that this is allowed to go on. Dead Pets Don't Lie, an important new book from Donna Howell and Joe Artis. We thank you for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.